Hey everyone, welcome to Professor Long's Lectures in Anatomy and Physiology. As you guys know, we're in the shutdown, blah, blah, blah. I'm tired of saying it. You're probably tired of hearing it. If you've been watching my videos, you know that we're in a shutdown. I've had to convert from face-to-face to online. This is my method of delivery of instruction to my students. These videos are intended for students who are enrolled in my Human Anatomy and Physiology courses at Del Mar College. This particular video is for Part 2A and P in the endocrine system. If anyone out there in the inter-Google stumbled across these on YouTube or whatever and you find them helpful, great. But know that the level of detail and the manner in which I cover the material is intended for my students. I'm trying to lay a solid foundation. There are some details I may not go into that we'll add in later on or will be added later on in your career. But if the foundation isn't set, those details don't mean anything. So for those of you that might want to send me messages saying, oh, well, you left this out or this out, I know. I'm trying to set the foundation. We'll get more complex and fancy later on. Anyway, this video is part of the endocrine series. This is the first video in the series of the simple endocrine reflexes. So in one of my videos, I went over the endocrine pathways. And in complex endocrine pathways, we go from hypothalamus to anterior pituitary to a target, or hypothalamus, anterior pituitary, another endocrine organ, and then the target. It's complex because there's several steps. We did the posterior pituitary. And so we have a stimulus detected in the hypothalamus, neurons send axons into the posterior pituitary, we release a hormone, it hits a target, we get the response. And we also did the direct endocrine stimulation of the adrenal medulla. The adrenal medulla will dump wholesale amounts of adrenaline or norepinephrine and its cousin epinephrine into our system so that we can get a global fight or flight response under prolonged stress. Okay. Now, we're going to start the simple endocrine pathways. They don't involve the brain. They don't involve the hypothalamus. Some endocrine organ somewhere else in the body is the detector. It detects a stimulus, releases a hormone. The hormone goes to the target, gives us a response. So when I make this drawing, I do it slightly differently. And again, I'm a drawing guy. If you want to do the list, I'll do the list too. But I like to draw pictures and picture what's happening in my body and play little movies in my head. But I'm kind of weird that way, and that's okay. So, somewhere in the body, we're going to have a stimulus that is going to be detected at some endocrine organ. So we're going to have a stimulus detected somewhere in the body at some endocrine organ. When this group of cells, the little dot in the middle is always the nucleus. I have a little bundle of cells here. When they detect that stimulus, they're going to release a hormone. As you guys should know from watching my videos, that H with an R fused is my shorthand for the word hormone. I get tired of writing it out. That hormone will then enter our bloodstream, travel through some blood vessels, and it will pop out at multiple locations of the body, but the only places the hormone can have an effect is at what we call the target cells. The cells that have the receptor for that particular hormone. The target cells are target organ. Now, the target cells are always going to give us the response that we need, the desired response. Okay? So now, when we do this list, if you want to follow along in my note set, we're going to be starting on page 29. We're going to do simple endocrine reflexes, and we're going to do glucagon and insulin. And I wanted to do them right after we've done the the glucocorticoids, cortisone and cortisol, because these hormones are very closely related to it. Okay? Sugar metabolism, since sugar is the primary source of energy in our body, our sugar metabolism, which keeps us alive, should be pretty important. And we have a number of hormones that help balance it out. Okay? Now, when it comes to glucagon and insulin, I have some sayings with some of the hormones that help you remember them. But essentially what we're going to have is we're going to have some kind of stimulus. We're going to list the stimulus. We're going to list the endocrine organ, what group of cells somewhere in the body. We're going to list the target. And we're going to list the response. And for some of these hormones, we might write out a mechanism. How is the response accomplished? What physiology has to go on for us to get that desired response? The first hormone we're going to do is going to be called glucagon. Now, I like to use this little saying. When glucose is gone, we release Glucagon. I hope you can read my shoddy penmanship up there, but when glucose is gone, we release glucagon. What that means is when our body, sorry, let me get some more markers. When our body runs out of sugar, glucagon is going to go and release sugar to replace it. When all your glucose is gone, we release glucagon. Now this hormone is going to be called an agonist. I'm going to write a word here. I'm going to erase it because we need to write over here, but there's this word called an agonist. It comes from the word to agonize. To agonize with someone means that you feel their pain. If they're going through pain, if you see your child very, very upset, it hurts your heart. You are agonizing, or you're going through the same thing that they are going through. So agonists, anytime we talk about an agonist, they have a similar action. Or they do the same thing. Glucagon is an agonist to cortisone and cortisol. It's going to do the same thing. There's a different reason though. So when it comes to the stimulus for the release of glucagon, what we can say is a low concentration of glucose in our blood. Actually, glucagon is usually tapped into first when our blood sugar level. Let me draw something on the board and explain this, and then it'll all make sense. If I have a typical human cell here with its nucleus, there is a boundary of how much sugar the cell can handle. Too high and too low are a bad thing. So normally, somewhere around 180 to 200 milligrams per deciliter of glucose, this is our glucose concentration, is too high. But when we get somewhere down around less than 100 or less than 80, when we start to drop pretty low, our cells don't have the ability to make energy. If our cell starts to drift too low down here, glucagon is released, and that will raise our blood sugar level back to normal. If glucagon release is failing, if our blood sugar is so low that glucagon is raising it, but we're not back to homeostatic levels, then cortisone can kick in and raise it even more. Okay? So, glucagon is sort of our first response to low blood sugar levels. If that fails, then we kick in the glucocorticoids, cortisone. And they're both going to raise our blood sugar levels. We say sometimes that glucagon does our our day-to-day, hour-to-hour blood glucose levels, and cortisone does the starvation extreme conditions. So when we have a low concentration of glucose in our blood, the endocrine organ that's going to detect that is going to be our liver. And in our liver, there's some little things called the pancreatic islets. And some books call them the islets of Langerhans, after the first scientists to really discover them and describe them, okay? The pancreatic islets, or islets of Langerhans, have several populations of cells in them. One of the populations of cells in the pancreatic islets are called alpha cells. The alpha cells of the pancreatic islets release glucagon. So, the little islets on the slide that we looked at in the pancreas have alpha and beta cells. There's also some other cells in there we're not going to talk about. But the alpha cells can detect low levels of blood sugar and release the hormone glucagon. Glucagon is going to target, guess what? Liver and skeletal muscle. It's going to raise the concentration of glucose in our blood. And it does so by glycogenolysis, or I like to sometimes pronounce it glycogenolysis, the lysis of glycogen. So we're going to digest glycogen, release glucose, it will enter our bloodstream, go back up, and it will shut this whole process off. Okay? So that's it for glucagon that you need to know for now. It's an agonist to cortisone and cortisol, the glucocorticoids, and it will raise blood sugar levels. But it doesn't have to get so extreme for glucagon to respond. So you should know this series of steps, or you should be able to plug them into this picture. What is the stimulus? Where are the cells that are detecting this stimulus, and what hormone are they releasing? What is the target? What is the response? And how do we get that response? We digest glycogen to release glucose. All right? Now, we're going to do another hormone that is also related to all of this called insulin. Sorry, I dropped my eraser here. Now, I'm going to erase some of this stuff, and I'm only going to change a few words. Okay? So now, when it comes to the hormone insulin, everyone hears about insulin because we talk about diabetes with insulin, and so I'm going to plug all this in. When it comes to insulin, one of the things I like to say is insulin makes your cells, and this marker's not writing very well. My blue markers aren't playing well with me today. I'm trying to find a good blue marker. Excuse me for a second. It makes your cells, let's hope this one writes, take glucose in. So before I get into all of this, let me give you the idea here. Our cells have an organelle inside of them called mitochondria. The mitochondria will take glucose and oxygen and convert them into 36 molecules of ATP. A lot of energy. But we can't do it unless the glucose is inside the cell. I'm going to switch colors because my blue markers aren't playing well today. So when you eat sugar, like glucose, the glucose stays in your bloodstream and will actually pop out into the interstitial fluids. Now, if the cell can't take the glucose in, I can't burn it. So our cells actually have channels, similar to ion channels, like sodium channels and potassium channels, called glucose channels. The glucose channel stays closed and glucose cannot enter the cell. Each glucose channel has receptors associated with it, and there's usually 2 of them, that will bind a molecule of insulin. The I with the circle is my version of insulin. When I bind insulin molecules to glucose channels, the glucose channel opens and then glucose goes into the cell. We call that glucose uptake. The cells take up glucose from the surrounding fluids and we burn it, which would lower our sugar levels. Okay? So, insulin makes your cells take glucose in, or insulin makes your cells take sugar in. Okay? So, that's what it does. Therefore, what would be the stimulus? The stimulus for this hormone, I'm going to use red so that you can see where we make the changes. The stimulus for this hormone is a high or elevated blood glucose level. You just ate a candy bar, drank a soda, and pounded down a bag of powdered donuts or something. Don't do that. But nonetheless, if you eat a lot of sugar, your blood sugar levels will go up. The same endocrine organ in our liver, the pancreatic islets or islets of Langerhans, have a second class of cells in there called beta cells. Beta cells are going to release insulin. Now, insulin is going to target a lot of tissues. It's going to target liver and skeletal muscle and adipose tissue, as well as many other cells, but these are the major ones. The job is going to be to lower your blood glucose levels. It's going to decrease it. And the mechanism is glycogenesis. This is at liver and skeletal muscle. We're going to convert glucose into glycogen. We're going to take it into our liver cells and our skeletal muscle cells. And if we don't need to burn it all, we'll just convert it to glycogen and store it in our sugar bank, so to speak. And at adipose tissue, we can convert sugar into fat. There's a group of fats called triglycerides, fatty acids, and glycerol. And we can convert sugar into fat, which is one of the things that is causing a massive really kind of an epidemic of obesity in parts of the world, the United States in particular, because we eat so much more sugar than we used to if you had to go forage for it. Every time you drink a Coke, eat powdered donuts or breads and cakes and pastas and We just overstuff and overstuff. Students come in with these 88-ounce gully washers and sit there and don't even move their chin. They just suck out of a straw the whole class. And you're literally giving yourself so much sugar that it is sugar causing obesity in the US. It is not the consumption of fat. It is the consumption of sugar. As one of our former instructors used to say, French fries and Cokes are killing America. And they are. So everything in moderation, folks, but that's what's going on. So now, we're kind of done with glucose. I'm going to erase some of this material, and I'm going to talk about some other stuff that's on this page in our note set. If you're following along in the note set, once again, we're on page 29. Now we're going to flip over to page 30, and we're going to talk about diabetes. Okay? So I am going to erase all of this, and then we will do some other hormones in another video. Okay? Now, when it comes to diabetes, I want you guys to understand this because diabetes is becoming somewhat of an epidemic in the United States. We live in South Texas, which happens to be considered one of the diabetes capitals of the world, South Texas and northern Mexico. We have more cases of diabetes per capita than many places in the world. So if you want to be a nurse and always have a job, you can go work for dialysis or somebody that deals with diabetes. Now, knowing what we know about diabetes, there's two different types that we can talk about. One of the types of diabetes is called, well, there's really three. There's diabetes insipidus, which is a lack of ADH. We don't produce enough ADH, so we pee like crazy. As we lose body fluids, the concentration of sugar in your blood goes up, but it has nothing to do with the hormone insulin. But we're going to talk about diabetes mellitus or mellitus. Okay. Some people say diabetes mellitus, some say diabetes mellitus. And there's two types of this. There's one that's called type 1 diabetes. In type 1, it is also known as insulin-dependent diabetes. In insulin-dependent diabetes, it is considered to be somewhat of an autoimmune disorder. Our white blood cells, called leukocytes, which is your body's defense against foreign cells, they fight off viruses and bacteria and things. Well, every now and then they get turned around on our own cells. Our immune system kills our own cells. So autoimmune means having immunity against yourself or your own cells. Now, our white blood cells destroy the beta cells of pancreatic islets. The patient can no longer produce adequate amounts or any insulin in some situations. If you cannot produce insulin, your body can't take the sugar in, so every time you eat sugar, it stays in your blood, and your blood levels of sugar go up and up and up and up because you're not burning it. Now, in this instance, your cells start to run out of energy because they don't have any glucose to convert it along with oxygen into ATP. And the biggest wimps of the human body that also burn energy faster and more than anything else are neurons. So people with diabetes, insulin-dependent diabetes or type 1 diabetes very often can start to get peripheral neuropathies. They can't feel fingers and toes, get blindness setting in, lots of cognitive issues and things can be setting in. So we see a lot of neural defects amongst many other things, okay? Which is why someone who has diabetes, they always want to check a patient's toes and fingers. I know my personal physician, when I go see him, the sign on the wall says, if you're a diabetic patient, please remove your shoes and socks. He wants to check your feet. Because of the peripheral neuropathy, you can't detect pain. If you got a cut on your toe and your immune cells don't have enough insulin, enough sugar, they can't fight either. They run out of energy. It's kind of like not giving fuel to a tank if you're in a battle. Without fuel and without ammunition, it's worthless. So your white blood cells can't fight off infections, and then you have to start doing things like amputations and stuff. So it's always important to watch those things. So that's type 1 diabetes. Now, in type 2 diabetes is called insulin independent, or some people refer to it as non-insulin dependent diabetes. Now, I'm just giving you some basics. Again, I'm not a physician, and I did not stay in a Holiday Inn last night, so, but I'm giving you some basics. I could go into much more detail, but this isn't the place or time for that. In this situation, the beta cells make insulin. The target cells lack insulin receptors. So, if you sit down and someone continues to talk to you incessantly, and it's just a constant onslaught of information and sometimes useless information, eventually you just start to tune out. You don't want to hear it, okay? So eventually you just cover your ears so you stop listening. Well, in this situation, here's what happens. Here's my target cell. Target cell is going to have glucose channels and insulin receptors, okay? So in order to take glucose into the cell, I need insulin binding to the receptors to let the glucose in, correct? Now, what if I flood the cells with so much sugar? Now look, if I make this little mark all over the cell, everywhere that I have this little mark sticking out of the cell would actually be these proteins, a glucose channel with insulin receptors. There are thousands of these on the surface of the cell. Over time, because these proteins are made by protein synthesis, transcription, and translation, because over time they get worn out, my cell can remove a few of these and then replace them later on through protein synthesis. We're constantly down-regulating or removing proteins and putting new ones in their place as they wear out, just like you replace a doorknob or something at your house. Well, if I flood the cell with so much sugar that the cell just can't handle it anymore, it's so amped out from all this energy, eventually the target cell, prior to this occurring, the target cell will start, as it removes these receptors and continues to remove receptors, it doesn't replace them. It's being so overwhelmed with the signal of sugar and insulin that it just removes the insulin receptors. Now, when I'm not drinking the 88-ounce gully washer and constantly eating sugar and eating sugar and eating sugar, how do my cells get energy? They don't. And we can begin to do what's called upregulation. Downregulation is the removal of the receptors. Upregulation is where we replace the receptors. We can go back into upregulation depending on how long it's gone on. If a patient does not continue to alter their diet and their lifestyle, they don't make the necessary lifestyle changes to get their sugar back in balance, then eventually your immune system will go destroy the beta cells, and then you can't even produce the insulin. So type 2 diabetes can convert to type 1 in many instances. If it's caught early enough and there's proper dietary control, changes in activity and things, and one of the drugs that is very often given is called glucophage, and there's several cousins to it that will break down all the excess glucose. So if you do eat too much sugar, you take your pill, it breaks down some of the glucose, the cell's not getting the signal. Sometimes, if caught early enough and treated properly, we can replace the appropriate number of glucose receptors and help heal that, or help cure that type of diabetes with control of diet, control of activities, change of lifestyle. You need to go over that stuff with a physician. If you or someone you know has type 1 or type 2 diabetes, then you need to consult with a physician, but this is the physiology behind the whys of what's going on, okay? So if you're in my note set, we've covered page 29, we did insulin and glucagon, and we've done page 30, at least the top half, we've done diabetes mellitus, type 1 and type 2. Look up diabetes insipidus. It asks you, why are glucagon and cortisol considered agonists? Because they have the same effect. They both raise blood sugar levels. Why are both of these considered an antagonist to insulin? Well, the word antagonist is the opposite of the word agonist. So I'm going to write this over here. Agonist, they have the same action. Ant comes from anti. So an antagonists have opposite effects. Since glucagon raises blood sugar levels and insulin lowers them, Insulin and glucagon are considered antagonists. Since cortisone raises blood sugar levels and insulin lowers them, cortisol and glucagon are considered antagonists. So, cortisol, and glucagon are agonists. Insulin is an antagonist to both of those, or all three of those. Got it? Listen, I hope this was informative. I hope you learned as much as, or you had as much fun as I did, and I hope you learned something. I'll see you in the next video. We're going to continue the simple endocrine reflexes, and hopefully this stuff is helping you. Hope you had as much fun as I did. See you on the flip side.